Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Haynes. I am the Executive Director of Philadelphia Family Pride, the LGBTQ-led family group in the greater Philadelphia area. I am excited to bring to you all tonight River Nice, who is a financial advisor, and their company is called Be Intentional Financial. Awesome name. And so I'm going to turn it over to River. But if folks want to also rename themselves, and if you go to participants and rename, you can add your pronouns to your name tag as well. So just those couple quick notes. PhiladelphiaFamilyPride.org is our website, and you can find us also with the full name Philadelphia Family Pride on Facebook and Philly Family Pride on Instagram. So that's my little plug for us, and I am going to turn off my audio and video and listen to the presentation along with everybody else. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. And if you need anything from me, you can also private chat to me. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks for coming, everybody. I said this a minute ago, but I know finance and money isn't the most fun topic to spend your Wednesday evening learning about. So glad that you're here. And I do want to reiterate what Stephanie said. Please use the chat box, especially with a small group here. I think we can make the hour as useful to you specifically as possible. So let me know what's useful, what's not useful, what you want to know, any questions you have. I'm happy to make this interactive. So just a little bit about me. I am a financial planner, financial advisor, financial planner. The terms are pretty used interchangeably. I usually focus on planner because I am focused on plans. So I like to help people figure out what they want out of life and then financially what it's going to take to be able to do that. So we can go over a lot of different things today. There's going to be a poll in a little bit to figure out what you want to hear about most. But I am focused on that planning aspect. So I'm not necessarily an investment specialist. I'm not the guy to go to tell you which stock is going to perform the best next quarter. I'm not the guy to help you file your taxes, but I am the guy to help you figure out how to make the down payment on the home, or how much you need to be saving for retirement, or how much you need to be saving to pay for your kids to go to college, that sort of thing. So I launched my company, Be Intentional Financial, almost a year and a half ago. Very exciting. I named my company that on purpose because my number one piece of financial advice is to be intentional. A little bit about my personal finance philosophy. I always start by saying capitalism is actively harming us all the time. I don't say that to offend any capitalists on the call, but I say it to show where I stand, which I think capitalism is bad for humans. I think that a system that prioritizes money over human life is bad for human life. I also like to acknowledge that there's a lot of emotions around money. I see shame a lot. I see guilt. I see anxiety a lot. And I think by talking about it, we can help to remove some of those difficult feelings, and we can remove some of the stigma that money is something that we're not supposed to talk about. In general, I try to avoid saying in general. I try to avoid rule of thumb numbers. People are always like, oh, River, what percentage of my gross income should I be spending on my rent? Well, what's your life? What are your priorities and values? What else is going on in your life? What else do you want for your future? Everybody is so unique and individual. I try to avoid just rules of thumb. I like to know more about the individual family and what they need before I make any kind of recommendation. And like I said, be intentional. So I believe very strongly in personal autonomy, and that means, whatever's going to work best for you might not be what works best for me, might not be what works best for somebody else, but it's all about what is most important to you, and are you using money as a tool to that end? So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk a little bit more about capitalism and the US financial structures that we live within. We're going to check in about our feelings a little bit. We're going to focus on the topics that are most important to you. I will answer questions throughout, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end as well. And I would love to end with each of you picking an action step of one thing that you're going to do to improve your financial life moving forward. So first, if you wouldn't mind typing in the chat, how are you feeling showing up to this talk about money? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Are you tired? What you feeling? We've got some anxious, we've got some excited. Great, look, my guesses were spot on. Okay, keep me posted. I know the anxiety is real, and I'm here to navigate it together. It makes sense to be anxious about money because money is necessary for survival. So the lack of it means difficulty surviving. So it is very human and very real to feel anxious when talking about survival. Trepidatious, I love that word. And here, great, I'm happy we're here together. And thanks for chatting, y'all. I'm excited to have a group that wants to talk to me. So let's talk a little bit about the world we live in. I don't want to focus on this for too long because none of it is actionable steps, but I can't not acknowledge it. So our financial systems that we live under in the United States and most of the world are not designed to be fair. Wealth stays in privileged groups, and that's on purpose. Rich get richer, poor get poorer. It's not just a catchphrase. It is real what the systems are designed to be. When I was working in a corporate financial advisory space, the conversations that happen behind closed doors opened my eyes so much to how real and accurate this is. It's very frustrating to me. We also live in a world where we are kind of pushed to spend money without realizing that we are spending money or how much we're spending. So paying with your phone, while it makes life a lot more convenient in a lot of ways, also detaches us from that feeling of how much we are actually spending or when we're spending. Things like free trials to rope you into a subscription, and then you're busy and you don't realize you've been paying for the subscription for 6 months. And also, I want to acknowledge advertisers are really good at getting us to spend money. There's a lot of psychologists and a lot of marketing teams that are really good at getting us to spend money that isn't necessarily within our specific priorities. 1 second. I also want to acknowledge the LGBTQ wealth gap. I don't say this to beat a dead horse, because if we're here and we're queer, then we have some sense that this is happening. But I like to remind all of us, including me, that within our community, some folks are more affected or less affected by the harms of capitalism. Within the LGBTQ community, we generally earn less. So I have some stats from 2017, which is not very long ago. We have been and still are discriminated against when finding jobs, when negotiating pay, in lots of other areas of life. We know this. Life is often more expensive for us than it is for straight cisgender people. So trans healthcare, trans legal and social transition costs, family creation costs if you can't make your own kids, legal protections that we need, second parent adoption. Like, there's so many things that we need to pay for that straight cisgender people don't need to pay for. And of course, we know that the racial wealth gap, gender wealth gap, ability wealth gap, fat wealth gap, there's so many ways in which so many different marginalized folks are oppressed, and that shows up financially as well as every other aspect of life. So there are members of our community that are multiply oppressed, and so capitalism is hurting them exponentially more. All this is to say that financial planning is never going to be enough to end our oppression. You can't financial plan your way into being a billionaire. We can't financially plan our way to not being discriminated against. So when I, as a financial planner, am working with the trans and queer community, which is my whole life mission, my goal is to mitigate the harms and make survival the most possible and make thriving the most possible under these unfair systems. Okay, so now that I've kind of done my intro and getting to know me stuff, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind throwing up the poll to ask our attendees what topics would be most helpful to cover today. I have a lot of different things I can talk about, but we only have an hour, so I want to focus in on what's most useful to those of you who are able to join us live. So go ahead and you should be able to select more than one also. So if it's all of them, go for it, be honest. just give folks a couple minutes. Okay, so looks like, oh, we got more. Great, I'll give you another minute. Okay, looks like our top 3 are budgeting, investing basics, and insurance, such as health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance. And then if we have time, we can try some debt management and some credit score stuff. Cool. Thanks, this is really helpful because otherwise I would have just started from the top. Oh, what did I? Great. So we'll start with budgeting. Okay. Now I have a different talk that I do that's a whole hour and a half on budgeting. So this is going to be the basics. Feel free to type in the chat what you want to know specifically, what you struggle with, what I'm saying doesn't make sense, let me know. Trying to make this specifically useful to you. So why create a budget? I'll go through this real quick. In my mind, budgeting is taking care of yourself and your family for the present tense and future tense as best you can. So we know all those things are unfair and are working against us. I struggle with not having $1 million, don't we all? And we know that budgeting isn't going to get us to $1 million, but budgeting is a way that we can be intentional with our money to take care of ourselves and our families as best we can with what we've got. Budgeting can help you not lose money unnecessarily to things like fees and interest, to consumer culture, like I talked about before. Budgeting can help you get clear about your goals and what it takes to work towards them. So if you're just going through life, kind of getting the paycheck and spending the money, and then one day you look up and you never went on the trip that you really wanted to take, it's because you didn't sit down and think through, what do I want to be spending my money on in my lifetime, and how do I make that happen? Another comment, budgeting for the needs versus the immediate wants. Yep, absolutely. Most folks struggle with that, I would say. Budgeting can help align your money with your priorities, basically. So I think a lot of people are afraid of budgeting because it feels like maybe a pass or fail exam that you have to take each month. Did I do the thing? Did I not? I'm less interested in that. I'm way less interested in shaming ourselves or other people for how we spent our money. And I'm way more interested in what do we want to be prioritizing and what habits can we build to prioritize that. So how do I create a budget? The theory of it is to figure out what your expenses are. And when you think through your expenses, also think through your goals. So it's not just how do I get through the next month? It's how do I get through the next month, and what do I want a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now? Is it any of the things that I said? Is it that I want to adopt a child? Is it that I want to take a sabbatical from work, buy a house, retire, pay for my kids to go to college? Any of the goals that you could have, start a commune, like what are the things that you want to do? And think through, how much do things cost? How much would you need to save over the next 2 years to be able to buy your dream car 2 years from now? Also think about emergency savings, and we can go over how to think about emergency savings. But when you're thinking about what are all of your expenses, include saving for the goals, saving for the emergencies. Once you figured out your expenses, also figure out your income. Is it just a paycheck every 2 weeks? Is it that you're self-employed? Is it that you have a paycheck but also a side hustle? Is your family a multiple income household? What are all of your sources of income? Write them down, figure out how much you expect to make in a typical month or week or whatever time period you want to focus on. And then match that income to those expenses. So if I make this much, it's going to go to housing first and food second and whatever the priorities are. And I like to say, remember to plan for the weird stuff. So it's really easy to be like, this is the list of bills that I know happen each month. And it's a little bit harder to remember that, I don't know, that you're going to need a new tire on the car at some point, or your kid's going to chop their hair off and need to go to the hairdresser. Like whatever weird thing could happen that you need to just put a little bit extra aside for, to remember that we can't plan for everything. Tools that you can use to create a budget. I'm a fan of the old-fashioned spreadsheet. There's also a tool that a lot of my clients like called You Need a Budget, or YNAB. That one costs money, but if you like it, you really like it. It's for people with a specific type of brain. You can check it out if you want to. There's also apps like Mint and stuff like that, and I'll get into that. So how do I figure out my expenses as the first step? I like to have my clients go back and look at them. I like to have my clients sit down with their credit card statement and checking account and look at the last month or 3 months, and what are each, what does each transaction say? What did I spend money on? What did my family spend money on? So that I can see in a non-judgmental, non-shamey, non-guilty way, just looking at what are the habits that I'm working with right now. Ideally, you would look at the last 3 months and kind of look at each transaction over the last 3 months and figure out how much you're spending on food and housing and shopping and the pets and whatever things in life that you typically spend money on. And then you can kind of get a monthly average over 3 months, since we know some months are different. Sometimes weird things happen. Remember to look at Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, whatever you're using to send money within the household, to send money outside of the household, to receive money. I think it was more common before the pandemic to split a meal with a friend and Venmo them, maybe a little less common since we can't go anywhere, but also think through, where did your cash go? So if you're looking at your checking account and you're like, oh, I pulled out 20 bucks here and 60 bucks there, what's your best guess at what that cash got spent on? I don't keep all of my receipts from when I use cash, but I know that if I use the ATM at Taboo, it probably went to drinks or drag performer tips. And then think about what less frequent expenses didn't show up in that 3-month period. So things like car insurance or annual subscriptions you have for things might not be something that came out of your account in the last 3 months, but is something that you want to plan for. And then when we think about weird stuff or emergencies, however you want to think about it, what are some emergencies that could come up that you might want to be prepared for? The things that I see most often are sudden medical expense for yourself or your kid, pet emergency, car repairs, or if you have family or close friends somewhere that you would need to travel to get to them, if you needed to suddenly be there, that can be an unexpected emergency expense. And when you're thinking through your expenses, think through how you want to categorize them for yourself. So I gave the example of like housing and food and pets and shopping and whatever, but it's really not about what me or any app or anyone else tells you of how you should categorize your expenses. Think through what do you want to know about your own habits? What do you and your partner or partners want to know about your spending habits? I have clients that categorize eating, like going to restaurants with friends as one separate category, as opposed to like takeout because I didn't feel like cooking as a different category, because they're much more interested in spending money socializing than they are in avoiding cooking. I have people who create a category for spending money on love, is how one client puts it. And they want to make sure that, you know, their partner's love language is gift giving or gift receiving. They want to make sure that they're putting money towards that and investing in the relationship in that way on a regular basis. So it's not about what anybody else says your category should be. It's about what makes sense to you and what's going to help you figure out whether you're in alignment with your priorities. So I'm going to take a second and talk about this question of budgeting for needs versus immediate wants. I'm trying to think if I have anything about this in the next slide, but I'll just talk about it a little bit. When I look at my expenses, I look back at what I have spent money on and how much I have spent in the past 3 months, maybe on a monthly average. or again, weekly average, whatever time period makes sense to you and how you get paid and how you think through time and money. But I look at my expenses over the last 3 months and I'm like, okay, I spent this much on my rent, this much on my cat, this much groceries, this much ordering food, whatever. And then I look at what things are my highest priority. So for me, like rent is probably highest, and then utilities to make sure I have lights and running water and things, and then groceries, and then cat food. So like I think through what of all of my expenses are most important to me. When it gets down to things like subscriptions to Spotify and Netflix, when it comes down to ordering food, or what else do I spend money on? That's like going to the barber instead of cutting my hair myself, stuff like that. I think it's really important to get clear with yourself and the people that are financially tied to you about what you would categorize as a need versus a want, or what you would think is more or less important than something else. So when I see how much I've spent in each of the categories that make sense for my life and how I think about things, I see, well, if I spent this much, if I spent $400 on ordering food and $200 on donations, is that actually my priority? Or do I want to be giving more money than I am spending on ordering out? None of this is in a judgment way. It's just in a figuring out what actually are you prioritizing with your money kind of way. See a comment that's really helpful. Great, thanks. And keep asking questions or telling me what you're struggling with so that I can continue making this useful. Go through really quick, just some quick tips if you want to try to save money or spend less. Easiest one is, are you paying for things that you don't actually need or you don't actually use? Are you paying for subscriptions that you didn't realize you were paying for? Have you actually watched something on Netflix in the last month? Are you paying for expensive things when cheaper things would be fine? If that expensive thing is part of your priority, then go for it. I'm not telling you to not do that. But if you realize that you're paying for whole food groceries when Aldi would do just fine, you could make that switch if you wanted to. Things that you think you should pay for, but you don't actually need. I think there's a general peer pressure that sometimes happens in our social circle where everybody's spending money on this thing or everybody's going out to eat at this place. And it's not necessarily your priority or your value. You just have that kind of low-level peer pressure happening. So just think that through a little bit. Is it actually your priority or is it somebody else telling you it should be your priority? You could try to negotiate lower bills or switch providers. Classic example is pitting Comcast and Verizon against each other to try to get the lowest cable and internet bill. You can do the same thing with cell phone providers. Whether or not you actually switch, by the way, you could just call up Comcast and be like, I'm going to leave you for Verizon, and just see what they say. They might just say, okay, screw you, but like it's worth a shot. Consider taking advantage of intro rates to temporarily get costs down. So if you do switch to Verizon, they might offer a cheaper rate for the package for the first year or something like that. And so if you don't mind the hassle of making the switch in order to save a few bucks each month, it could be worth it. It's up to you. And the thing I keep saying, are your expenses in alignment with your priorities and values? So some numbers you don't have a ton of control over. If your family's settled into your rental house and that's the best spot for you to be living in, you can try to negotiate a lower rent, but you might just be stuck with it. But for the stuff that you can control how much you spend on, just are you prioritizing the things that you want to prioritize? So now I created my budget. How do I use it? The theory would be to track your income and expenses continuously. The best way to be intentional about what you're spending is to face it, is to look at it on an ongoing basis and see, well, I said I would spend $300 on groceries this month and I've already spent $250. So I'm going to need to clean out the freezer before I go back to the store, whatever it is. But also remember, this budget is not a pass-fail exam that somebody else is handing down to you that you have to pass. You can modify it as you need to, as you get to know yourself, as you talk to your partner. Figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And sometimes priorities shift. This month, it was really important to donate more money. And next month, it's going to be really important to get the car fixed, like whatever is important to you. I think it's helpful to find some kind of accountability system, whether that's sitting down with your partner once a month to look at the budget and just talking over the choices that you both made, whether it's checking with a friend, whether it's a financial planner, whatever's going to help you stay accountable to your own priorities, not to shame you, not to make you feel like you're being tested in any way, just to remind you that you said this was important to you. Are you living that way? Tools you can use, again, spreadsheets, you need a budget. And this is where apps like Mint can be helpful. I think Mint is like the most common one that I hear people talk about, but there's a bunch of them out there now. And I think even some banks have tools that'll show you, maybe American Express cards will show you a little pie chart of what you've spent your money on in the last month. I think apps like Mint, the idea behind it is that you link your accounts to the app and you tell it how much you want to spend per category in a month. And then it pulls in the transactions automatically and tries to guess what category each transaction goes into, and then tells you, you spent this much in this category so far, so you only have this much left for the month. My problem with it is that when it's pulling the transactions in and trying to automatically categorize them, it's usually wrong. The artificial intelligence is not that good yet, especially when it's things like Venmo transactions between partners. The artificial intelligence has no idea what category to put that in. So if you go in pretty regularly and tell it, this is what this goes, this is where this goes, it can be really useful. But if you know yourself and you're not going to keep up with that, then it might not be worth pretending that you're going to do it if you're definitely not, you know. How's everybody feeling after talking about budgeting? Was it helpful? Did it stress you out more? Are you scared? I'm going to find my next set of slides while, oh, I did say we were going to talk about emergency savings. I see helpful. I see feelings. That's fair. You don't have to know what the feelings are. We can do it. Yes. Reassured we are on the right track. Seems helpful, palatable, and seemingly simple. It can be simple. It can be simple. When I look back at my expenses, I kind of round everything up to the nearest $5. I'm like, okay, so my cell phone bill is about $60 or whatever it is. And if I get it all written down in one place, maybe it's overwhelming at first, but then it's all listed out right there. And it's like, okay, this is what I need to do. And this is the order in which they are important to me. It can be simple. I'll talk about emergency savings super quick. Emergency savings fund is setting aside money specifically to use in case of emergency. I meet a lot of folks who are like, I try to save money when I can, or I regularly save money or whatever, but I don't really know what it's for. I suggest designating an amount of savings to be for emergencies, and then designating an amount of savings to be for vacation or retirement or kids or whatever thing you want to be saving for. But I think everybody needs some sort of emergency savings if it's possible for you to save anything, because things always happen. Stuff always comes up that we didn't expect. And if we don't have savings to cover that unexpected expense, that's how we end up in credit card debt most of the time, or medical debt, or other types of debt that might be hard to get out of. How much should be in my emergency savings fund, River? Well, I don't like rules of thumb. So start with what you got. If you have $5 in your savings account, congrats, you've got $5 ready for emergencies. Try to add another $5 to it when you can. Maybe come up with an amount that you know you can set aside each paycheck or each month. But really, when we think about how much to put in it, like maybe think about what are the most likely emergencies. Do you have a dog that likes to eat things he shouldn't eat? Do you have a kid who falls down and climbs trees and falls out of trees? Like, what is the most likely emergency and how much would it cost to get through it? Do you have a roof that might need to be repaired at some point in the next couple of years? Like, just think through, what is an emergency? Do your parents live in Florida and you might need to fly down there at a moment's notice? Like, just not to scare yourself, not to doomsday it, but just to realistically think through, well, if I had $1,000 just sitting in an account to buy a plane ticket, then I know that that would be covered if that were to happen. And that can be a goal. Where to put your emergency savings. Keep it somewhere accessible. So I don't want to see you investing your emergency savings because it could take a few days to pull that money out of that account. And also, if it's invested, there's always the risk that it loses value. And then when you need it, you have to pull out less money than you hoped would be there. So I usually recommend a savings account, an FDIC insured savings account, which means any major bank will be fine. And keep it just in that account. This is for emergencies. I know that I could withdraw it right away if I needed to, and I know where it is and I know how much is there. And then when do you use it? People sometimes feel guilty when they use their emergency savings for emergencies. Like, that's what it's there for, guilt-free. If you need to get somewhere, if you need to pay a medical bill, whatever it is, you need to take the dog to the emergency vet in the middle of the night, like, use the money. That's what it's there for. Don't feel guilty about it. Okay. 7:35. I'm watching my time. So I'm going to skip down to investing basics. But if you have questions, continue to drop them in the chat. Okay. Investing basics. And again, basics. Something that I think folks don't always realize, all investing includes paying fees. No matter how you're investing, what type of investment account you have, if it's a robot or a person, you're always going to be paying fees in order to have the privilege of investing. That's how it works. There's always going to, if you're investing in some type of fund, there's going to be a fee that goes to whoever created and manages that fund, whoever's deciding what things go into the fund. If a robot is deciding it, then the money's going to go to whoever owns the robot or the artificial intelligence. If you're invested in something that gets traded over time, then there's going to be fees that go to the person who's literally standing on the stockroom floor and making the trade. Ashley, yes, I can make the PowerPoint available later. You may have seen there's a lot more info in here than we're going to have time for today, so I'm happy to make this available. So just something to know. You're never going to be not paying fees to somebody when you invest money. When you think about, I want to invest, people come to me all the time. They're like, River, I feel like I should be investing my money, but I don't know anything. I say start with figuring out what your goal is. What are you investing for? Are you investing in a 401k to plan for your own retirement? Are you investing in a 529 to plan for your kids to go to college? Are you investing because you just want to grow wealth to leave to your family when you leave the world? Like, what is the goal here? Are you investing because you're hoping that you'll have more savings 5 years from now in order to make a down payment on a bigger house? And when you think about what's the goal, also think about when would that happen? Because investing for 30 years from now is very different than investing for 2 or 3 years from now, or investing just in the hopes of making money for no specific goal. All investment carries a level of risk, and deciding how much risk you're willing to take for how much potential reward is an important part of making investment decisions. Would like to hear my thoughts on a 529 if there is time. Okay, if there is time, I will write it down. Okay. When it comes to what things you can invest in, things like money market funds or CDs are going to be the least risky. Then we get into bonds are less risky, and then stocks are more risky. Most of the time, you're not actually going to invest in specific bonds or specific stocks. We're going to talk about diversification in a second, but just to start wrapping your brain around this. And when we talk about risk, the more time you have until you need the money, the more risk you can afford. So I'm 28. When I put aside money into an investment account for my retirement, I know that I've got 40 years. So I can take more risk now, because if I lose money, if that risk does not pay off, I've still got 40 years for that to regrow, for that loss to be recouped. Whereas if I wanted to invest money into just a regular investment account in the hopes of having enough money for a down payment on a home in 2 years, I'm less willing to take on a lot of risk, because if that doesn't pan out, if I don't get that reward for that risk, I could have $0 or less than I started with when it comes time for that down payment. So the time horizon is, I think, usually the most important factor. But if you have no idea what risk makes sense for you and what you're trying to do, you can do a quick Google, find a risk tolerance survey. There's a few out there that have been created by the investment and economics experts that'll help guide you in thinking through how much risk you're willing to tolerate for whatever goal you have. So diversification is really important in investing. If you put all of your money in Amazon stock, and then we actually get to take down Jeff Bezos and Amazon stock tanks, and all that becomes worthless, you've lost all of your life savings. Whereas if you invested a little bit over here, a little bit over here, a little bit over here, a little bit here, if one of those tanks, you've still got other options. You didn't lose everything in one place. So mutual funds are a very common investment tool. The idea of a mutual fund is that a lot of investors pool their money and a lot of investment securities, so stocks and bonds, get pooled, and each investor gets a tiny slice of each security, basically. So if we pool all the things together, then we can share the risk among us. An ETF is a very similar tool, but it can be traded like stocks. So an ETF is sometimes has less expensive fees or sometimes has more expensive fees depending on the fine print. I'm trying to stay high level and stick with terms that you may have heard and that I want you to be able to understand. Socially responsible investing is something that I get asked about a lot, especially as the trans anti-capitalist financial planner. The idea is that by investing in socially responsible companies, you are choosing to invest your money in what you want to see more of in the world, and you're investing less in what you want to see less of in the world. The problem with that is that everyone has their own definition of socially responsible. So you could find a socially responsible fund and they are not investing at all in cigarettes or guns, but they're investing heavily in Amazon, like, or, Fox News, like what are the things in oil? Thank you, Stephanie. And in most cases, like most diversified portfolios, most mutual funds are going to have tiny slices of companies that don't align with your values. It's very difficult to balance the socially responsible according to your own values with the diversification needs. So it's a tricky thing. There's tons of different socially responsible portfolios and it's getting more popular all the time. The situation 10 years ago is very different than the situation now. But that's the point that I really want to drive home is that what do they mean? What does that company mean when they say socially responsible? Is it that, half the C-suite executives in that company are women, but none of them are Black? Probably. And sometimes socially responsible portfolios can have higher fees. And it's because it can take more time and effort for a person to select what's going to go into that portfolio than if they're just grabbing a little bit of everything. If they're actually thinking through what's socially responsible according to whatever definition, it's going to take more time and effort. So they're going to charge you more fees. Okay. That was my investing basics. It is 7:42, so I will jump down to some insurance stuff. How's everybody feeling? Okay, health insurance. So an HMO is a health maintenance organization plan, and it means you usually need a referral to see a specialist. A PPO means you usually don't need a referral to see a specialist. Those are the two most common that I see, but there's all different health insurance plans. So read the fine print, I guess, or hire a financial planner to do that for you. Some more vocabulary. Deductible is the amount of money you have to pay out of pocket for the year before the insurance company will pay anything. And I'm seeing more and more high deductible health plans from employers. So it's a high deductible that you have to pay before they start actually paying for your healthcare. A copay is the amount of money you always have to pay for a particular thing, like a primary care visit or a specialist. And that goes on top of what the insurance company is paying. So that's the amount that you're responsible for. And there's tons of more terminology, but I'm not trying to take up our whole time with a vocabulary lesson. How to decide which healthcare plan. If your job offers you multiple, or you're just out looking at the open market for health insurance, how do you decide? I like to start with what are the typical needs for myself and my family. I make a spreadsheet and I start a list. I'm like, okay, so everybody goes to the primary care doctor once. Sometimes we need to run to an urgent care. I know I need this medication on this frequency. What other needs? Therapy, psychiatry, assistive devices. What are the things that you need to pay for that you hope that the health insurance will help pay for? And then think through like this coming year. Do I have any family creation needs? Do I have any surgeries coming up? What are the things? The question, how are you meant to estimate what you need for the next year? Are we meant to be psychic when it comes to potential future health issues? I mean, because our healthcare system is messed up, they kind of think that we can do that. They just don't care about us. That's the answer. But are we meant to be psychic? No, I'm not telling you to be psychic. Let's think about it this way. What is the best case scenario for the next year, health-wise? What is the least cost for healthcare that could happen in the next year, realistically? For me, it would be that I go to I see my primary care doctor 4 times to check on my testosterone levels. I go to therapy once a week. I go to the gynecologist once. Like that's kind of my best case health year. So that's one list. And then what's my worst case health year? What is the worst, most expensive thing that could happen? Again, not to get all doomsday about it, but to realistically think, what is something that would be very expensive and terrible for me, health expense wise? And it's so garbage that our country makes us think about this. And what would that cost in this insurance plan versus that insurance plan? Or if we think of the worst case just as hitting the out-of-pocket maximum, if the healthcare plans that we're looking at have an out-of-pocket maximum, how much is it? So in my worst case scenario, if I had to pay the most in medical bills that I've ever had to pay, what's the maximum that I would have to pay out of pocket before my health insurance company takes the rest of it? This is very helpful. Thank you. I'm glad. Life insurance. And keep asking me questions, even if it's about something from a slide or two ago. I'll get to it. Some life insurance vocabulary. Term life insurance is the most basic. It just provides coverage for a specific time period. And in case you don't know, life insurance is something that will pay out money to your beneficiaries if you were to pass away. So term life insurance, you say, okay, over the next 20 years, if I were to pass away, please pay out this amount of money to my spouse or kids or sibling or whoever, or a charity. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be an organization. So the term life insurance is very simple. You pick a period of time. So maybe 20 years until the kids are in college, or 30 years until the mortgage is paid off, or whatever the thing is. And then if I were to pass away and my family no longer had my income, how much money would I want to be leaving behind to them so that they could pay off the mortgage or pay for college or whatever the thing is. There's also permanent life insurance, and this gets complicated and tricky. There's many different types, but the idea is that it's permanent. It is a lifelong coverage. And there's oftentimes an investment component to it. So when you get into intense financial planning that I had to learn about when I was in the corporate sector and was helping just wealthy people keep their money, life insurance with an investment component is often a way that wealth is inherited by the next generation of that family. The premium is what you pay to buy the policy. There's usually an annual or monthly payment, especially for term life insurance. It usually ends up being something that you pay throughout the length of the term. The benefit is the amount that is paid out to your beneficiary if you were to pass away. So if you're taking out a 20-year term policy for $1 million, then it would cost you a higher premium than if you were taking out the same policy, but for $500,000, if that makes sense. Why would you need it? I gave you some examples, but it's horrible enough when somebody passes away. But if there's anybody depending on your income, especially for kind of a long period of time, like they're expecting you to be there providing income for another 20 or 30 years, leaving behind money when you are gone can be a way to help ease the financial stress when they're already dealing with grief. Some specific needs that could exist for life insurance is if there's any debt that you would leave behind that doesn't go away when you pass away, you might want to make sure that you have enough life insurance that would pay off that debt so that nobody who's left behind has to then deal with the debt. Christy asks, when calculating life insurance amounts, should we consider our pensions and any life insurance we may have through work? The short answer is yes. So when you think through what are my life insurance needs and then how much life insurance do I have available, we also think about what debts and assets do you have. So if I know that I have $20,000 in private student loan debt, I say private because federal student loan debt goes away if I pass away, but private student loan debt doesn't necessarily. So if I've got $20,000 in student loan debt, but I've got $50,000 in my retirement savings account, then I think that probably my retirement savings could be used to pay off the student loans so that my family isn't left with having to pay that debt. But if the amount of debt that I have is greater than the amount of assets that I have, or if I am splitting a mortgage with a spouse and it's going to be difficult for them to keep paying that mortgage if I'm not around for income, then I might want to have a little bit more to help cover those costs. How does the money payout work? If you have a premium of $500,000, but you haven't paid that amount in, where does all that money come from? Oh, great question. I'm sorry, I didn't explain this thoroughly enough. So it's insurance. It's kind of a gamble that you're making against yourself. So you're paying $20 a month or something, and thousands of other people are also paying $20 a month. And the insurance company is gambling. Not all of you are going to die in that time period. So when somebody does die, the insurance company has to pay out money from their pockets because they made that contract with you. But they're gambling that they're going to be able to make more on the premiums than they are paying out in the benefit. Does that make sense? I'm going to keep talking, but Betty and Lisa, let me know if that's clear, if you need more information. When thinking about how much you might want to have in life insurance, also think about if there are any end of life expenses. So hospital bills, funeral costs. Again, if your loved ones are already grieving, we don't want them to also be financially stressed if we can avoid that. So when thinking about your own life insurance, think about how long do you need that coverage for? Is it just to get a kid through college? Is it just to pay off a mortgage? Is it to get your spouse through retirement? Betty and Lisa, that makes sense, but doesn't everyone eventually die? So what if life insurance goes out of style when they go broke the company? So that's why term insurance is usually for 30 years or less. And the premiums are more expensive the older you are. So they charge you more money if you're more likely to die. They also sometimes give you like a health exam or make you get a doctor's note or something to prove if you're healthy or not, so that if you're more at risk of death, they charge you more money. It's very gross to talk about, but that's the gamble that the life insurance company is making. When it comes to permanent life insurance, that's also why there's an investment component so that the money is also invested in growing. Yeah, very tricky. Thank you for asking. I don't want to get too far off topic, but an insurance that did go out of style was long-term care insurance. It still exists technically, but the idea was if you paid into this insurance over your working years, and then eventually you needed to go into a nursing home or some kind of long-term care, you needed to pay for some kind of long-term care help, the insurance company would pay for your long-term care needs. But then a lot of people lived longer than they had in previous points of history, and it got too expensive for the insurance companies. And so now the premiums that they're charging for that kind of insurance is way unaffordable for the majority of Americans. So that was not a good gamble for the long-term care insurance people. Life insurance, I'm less worried about because especially for term insurance, it has that term. And then after 30, so if you do outlive the 30 years, then you die the next day. They don't have to pay out anything. Okay, so how much life insurance do you need? How long do you need the coverage for? So if I were to pass away next year, what would my family need versus if I passed away 40 years from now, would my family still need anything from me, or would I have saved enough in that time period in my retirement account to not have to need anything additional? What expenses would your dependents need covered right away? So when you take out a life insurance policy, you designate one or more beneficiaries, and that means the money goes directly to them, and it goes faster than if the money went through a will in most cases. So if there's the potential that you would leave behind hospital bills, then you might want to make sure that there's at least a small term life insurance policy that would pay out $100,000 to your spouse immediately. But also think through what expenses are your dependents relying on you for in the long term. So I use the example of the mortgage a lot. If you and your partner take out a 30-year mortgage, and you know that neither one of you could afford it without the other, you might want to take out some life insurance policies for the amount that would pay off the mortgage in full, so that if one of you wasn't around anymore, the other would be able to keep the house. But it's also not necessarily just specific goals. I want to say, like, if you're building a life with a family where you're expecting to work for the next 20 or 30 years and your family's building a lifestyle based on that income, you might want to have just the life insurance to cover the amount of income that you could make over 20 years so that they don't have to change their lifestyle if you're not around to help provide the lifestyle. But it comes down to comparing how much the premium costs to how much coverage you can get. So you can talk to a life insurance broker who will compare different insurance plans for you, and they can help you see, like, okay, so getting $1 million of coverage would cost me this much. Getting $2 million of coverage would cost me this much monthly for the next 10 years, whatever it is. And that can help you kind of work it into how much you're paying in your day-to-day budget and how much coverage you have in case the worst happens. So how do you get it? Life insurance can be offered as a work benefit. Sometimes they offer you just a baseline amount to start, and then you can pay in to get additional on top of that. Depends on what your work offers you. You could talk to an insurance broker or a financial advisor who sells insurance. I don't sell insurance, but some do. Be careful, because sometimes the financial advisors are earning a commission for selling you this insurance product instead of that one. Doesn't mean that one's the wrong one, but you want to make sure you're getting the right one. Insurance brokers are more likely, I think, to compare different options and help you figure it out. Christy asks if there have been any changes to the basics of term life insurance because of COVID. Interesting. I haven't seen anything, but I haven't looked into it, honestly. I would guess not, because the people most likely to die from COVID are the people that the insurance companies would consider to be most likely to die anyway, as horrific as all of this is. I haven't seen anything from other financial advisors or insurance brokers about COVID changing term life insurance. You could also always just talk to whatever insurance provider you have and see if they offer life insurance. Okay. It is, oh, we're almost out of time. This went so fast. Okay, disability insurance, really quick. Keep asking me your questions. If you have to leave, that's fine. We'll put the recording up later. Disability insurance. So I think most folks have heard of like going on disability, or like the government paying out money to you if you are disabled, and how much of a pain in the ass that is, and how it's not usually enough, and how you have to fight with the government a lot to actually get your income. Disability insurance is the private insurance version of that. So if you become disabled, and the definition of disabled varies, but if you become unable to work for some covered reason, the policy would pay out regular payments to replace some or all of your income. So this is a gamble that the insurance company is making, is that you're going to continue to be able to work. And it's the hard gamble that you're making, that if you are unable to work, you want to at least have some money coming in still. There's usually separate policies for short-term disability and long-term disability. Sometimes employers offer one or the other. Sometimes they offer both. Short-term is usually like 3 months, and long-term can be 2 years. Long-term used to be until retirement, but that got too expensive because too many people got disabled and needed to be paid out for 30, 40 years. And the insurance companies didn't like that. So now a lot of times they cap it at 2 or 3 years. It is different from Social Security or the government disability benefits because this is a private policy specific to you rather than the government social service. In my experience, it's more likely to pay out than there's oftentimes less paperwork. It's a private policy that you took out. They already know who you are and things about you. So it can often be a little bit less of a fight than having to fight the government for your disability check. Why would you need it? If you were unable to work for a short or long period of time due to some accident or illness, how would you and your family get through that financially? Would you need more money coming in? Would you be able to survive without your income? What's your situation? How much do you need? Think about your regular budget and then compare how much the premium costs to how much coverage you get, similar to what I said. Just kind of think through what fits into the budget right now and what could fit into the budget if something unexpected and unpleasant happened. Sometimes you can get disability insurance through work. And again, you can just buy it from some kind of insurance broker or agent or financial advisor. Also for disability and life insurance, you could probably just Google around and find some quotes online. That might not necessarily be the best quote, but it could give you a sense of what kind of ballpark we're talking about for how much these things cost. I don't have time for all these other types of insurance, but they're things to think about. Pet insurance, renters, auto, homeowners. Personal property insurance is to insure things like an engagement ring or an expensive guitar or a computer or something like that. Long-term care insurance, I mentioned briefly. Umbrella insurance is something that you would get in addition to your auto insurance or homeowner's insurance, so that if you're in a car accident and it's your fault and you injured the person and the person's in the hospital, your auto insurance would pay out some amount to cover their hospital bills. But if they also sue you and are trying to get more money from you, the umbrella insurance would then kick in and pay out so that the person can't sue you for your actual savings. Cool. So I'm sorry we didn't get through everything and that I didn't leave much time for questions, but I'll hang out for 5 more minutes if folks have more questions. And I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for being active in the chat and for letting me know what you needed to know. I love making these helpful. And thank you, Stephanie and Philadelphia Family Pride, for having me.